Live from some guy's basement in the heart of Miami, Florida.
How's that waveform looking?
This is Smooth Thoughts. I'm your host, Colonel Chimp. And to my right, the wonderful, the magnificent, the...
All right.
Barely legal.
I think this works.
John. What's up, John?
Number 6.
Number 6. Ooh, that's a good number. All right, number
ST6. All right. So the guests have been fun. Back to science.
Back to the science.
The lamest shit I could ever say.
I suppose. So what are we talking about today?
Okay, so...
talking about cats.
I've been watching a million interviews with Michael Levin.
All right, tell me about him.
I'll post some stuff so that people can see his work. We mentioned him before with the Xenobots. Yeah, I mean, I guess his stuff seems kind of crazy. It's kind of insane. I guess I don't want to go too much into like his experiments. I'll link to like other interviews and like papers he's done, but like basically, but I guess a little bit. The Xenobots. Okay, I'm gonna cut to the main idea, right? Basically, he's a bioengineer guy, and he's found that the way that bodies decide what direction to go in, how to form themselves, and when to stop, because in his view, that's the most important thing, is when does an organism actually know when to stop growing?
What do you mean by body?
An organism.
Okay, so any living organism.
Yeah, like any living organism, it is born and it grows, and when does it know to stop growing? And so basically, the analogy that he has sort of come up with is that DNA is the hardware of, let's say, the body as a computer, is the hardware of the body, and he has found an underlying electrical voltage gradient sort of language that facilitates the software of the body. And what he, you know, to go into that is that he's actually been able to use the electrical voltage gradient on these worms that he works with, planarian worms, to change them to have body parts of different species, and manipulate the way that the body parts grow on the worms.
Yeah, I saw that on one of them where because these are worms where you cut them and then they just they segment into two different worms, right?
Yeah, and apparently they live forever, which I didn't really actually believe that an animal is able to do that. But so yeah, they live forever. They don't die, and if you cut them, they just grow into two.
Right. So just like a starfish. So what's interesting there, like you're saying, like so they were able to use voltage gradients to know to tell the cells to do something different. So they ended up instead of a worm becoming one side head, one side tail, it ended up with two heads on either side. Or a different voltage gradient said, okay, build a tail. So ended up with two tails on either side.
Right, yeah. So that's
weird.
That's one of the best examples is when he looked at embryonic worms and measured, like what is meant by voltage gradient is that potassium, magnesium, sodium, all these things that we eat and are extremely important parts of the diet are charged ions. Electrolytes are ions, they're charged ions, and they're a crucial part of our diet.
And of our cell structure.
Exactly. And what they do is they create voltage gradients across cell networks, because since they're charged, it's the sort of dynamic of concentrations in particular areas that create voltage gradient. And so he looks at these embryonic like organisms and he notices that there's a voltage gradient pattern, and that pattern correlates with what body parts are going to be developed.
So somehow somehow there's a code there, like you were saying, software. There's a code that corresponds to a physical outcome.
That this to me is one of the most insane things I've heard in biology or in science in general for so long. And the thing is, biology doesn't really, I feel like it moved that fast. Like we haven't really learned very much new about biology in a really long time. And part of that is, of course, the ethical problems that comes with learning about biology.
What happened to good old human experimentation?
Right.
Come on, people. All for science, right?
It's so crazy that only a little bit more information about biology will give us huge benefits, but that little bit to know requires some extremely problematic ethical practices.
Yeah, no, and that's one of the things I honestly I do hate. And it's like you're saying, like we've gotten so much from it, but like you have to lose so much. Like, and now they do it mostly on dogs, on beagles,
and even that is problematic. Animals, it's like the easier it is to like dismiss the animal's agency, the more people are okay with experimenting on them, the further it is from us. And even a mammal, which really is not that much of a good thing to go by to compare to us,
to humans, right,
is still so problematic ethically, and I mean for good reason. But that's just interesting about biology. So I mean, for better or for worse, he did manipulate these worms and frogs were the main subjects in his experiments, and so that's kind of just a mind-blowing concept to me, to think that there's a software that the body has that informs it in what direction to go in, especially when I feel like all this time we've focused on DNA.
Exactly.
And I've always been really just kind of cynical about like how much can be done by manipulating DNA, which is why bioengineering wasn't a field that I was like all that like interested in and felt curious about, because it just didn't feel like to me DNA was a sort of like efficient enough way to like manipulate things. It's so clunky. And so when you refer to it as the hardware of the body, it makes perfect sense, because like, one of his examples is that like early computers, you actually tried to execute like programs by moving wires and shit. But, so it goes back to the circuit board thing. Like a circuit board is so, you look at a circuit board and it's like, I'm not going to be here like moving wires. So to have another layer on the body that you call a software, that's these like distributed electrical charges that somehow or another, and that's a good question, like how does the body read that? And so kind of goes back to the memory thing, because I like that memory is a recurring theme on the pod, and we're called Smooth Thoughts, and I think that's a nice full circle there, because what it implies is that every system has its memory through these voltage interactions, and that memory is used to inform each system in the body what direction to go in, organs, even individual cells. The question of how they get grouped. But so, yeah, he was able to do a lot of crazy stuff. He was able to cut a worm, trick the other side into growing another head, trick one worm to grow the species of a different worm.
That's right.
He took this frog's embryonic skin cells, which would have been receiving a message to know what to do, right? As an embryo, the skin cells are sort of still some stem cells, and the voltage gradient is what prompts it to become skin. But he took that skin, separated it from the signaling that it would have gotten, and the skin, and this is actually so mind-blowing that its implications are we'll go into it, but the skin actually just decided to become sort of an independent organism without a frog body to signal it to become frog skin. The skin cells just took on a sort of life of their own.
Right.
And they even, I don't even, this is so insane. They even were able to go around and collect other skin cells and build another little, so instead of becoming skin, they become like little balls, kind of like little tumors.
Yeah.
And then they use the hair that would have been on the skin as just an appendage that grew all around it. And then they were able to collect other skin cells and build other ones. He didn't do anything to them. He just separated them from the electrical signaling that told it was a frog skin. And without that electrical signaling, I mean, the consequence of that is that biology in general goes in a direction. Whether it's, you know, of course, if I cut my hand off, it's going to lose every capacity of being able to stay alive. You know, and so without any like nerve messages, with, you know, my hand's not going to do anything. But, you know, I guess considering it was sort of like embryonic cells, they were able to, I mean, that's a big question, you know?
I mean, that is crazy, but I think it is crazier that he was able to induce the part of a different species. So that definitely shows that there is a local memory, and local in terms of like evolutionary pathways. Like, okay, so like and that gives a little bit of credence to like our system of taxonomy, because it shows that, okay, these two species are so similar that we group them together, that somehow the cells or whatever is keeping the memory knows how to switch to a different, you know, like group in that, what is it, kingdom, phylum, order, family, class, genus, in that genus, you know, a different species in that genus. And that's nuts. Like, so how much memory is actually saved? How far back does it go?
Well, we know we're 60% banana.
But if I were to cut off my arm, can we do a voltage gradient to suddenly like grow a banana?
I've been wondering that all week. I've been racking my brain.
I am hungry.
Because, I mean, sure, we're 98% chimp. It's probably a lot easier, you know, to like maybe... We'll see, because he's doing a lot of experiments right now that he's very hush about. And he had people ask him questions, and he's like, I can't talk about anything that's ongoing right now.
Yeah.
But he's a good scientist. That's why, because, you know, he has to know his conclusions before he says it. But he seems confident that he can manipulate the body into growing things. Yeah. I mean, that's...
But then we get back into the whole, well, you know, human experimentation. What are you going to do? Take a little kid?
You know, I'm sure he's going to, you know, I'm sure he's going to start with mammals, and I don't think it's going to take a kid. I think any person with the money and a missing arm will get in line.
And is there a window of opportunity where this has to happen? Can you do it to someone who lost their hand like a week ago?
Yeah, dude,
that's
the what's happening right now. I guess those are the questions that he's working on right now. But right, if you take that far, though, I was thinking today, you know, it's like, right, if you think about this planarian, and he was able to have another species be called on, which I guess theoretically is because I think it was an older species. And so I guess theoretically, I mean, because, yeah, like the funny idea that like we're so-and-so percentage of another animal, it's like that hardware is there. Which, right, that's a pretty ludicrous concept to think that we, you know, can start cross-speciesing. Although I remember Batman Beyond as a kid, and I always wanted those cat eyes that the hoodlums used to get. It's incredible how prophetic that show ended up being. Art in general is always incredibly prophetic. But but yeah, like all the hoodlums would genetically modify themselves, and so I guess all this time we'd think is the DNA, right? And that's why I was like, well, you can't, CRISPR is so lunky. It's like you have to, they that one Chinese guy did it to babies, and it's like we have no idea how that's going to affect them across a lifetime. Their hardware has been changed. I mean, that's extreme though. That could be some extreme, it could go either way. Extremely interesting, extremely horrific.
That just makes me think of mRNA technology.
Yeah.
What happens when you change the hardware and we have no idea what's going to happen?
Yeah. I mean,
but we won't get into that.
But okay, I don't want to get too into it, but I will say this, because every time I hear that, I think, do you think it spontaneously occurred from nature? Or do you think it was created in a lab?
Okay, so I think that there were lab experiments.
Right.
So I don't think that humans can create a virus because we just don't know that much. But you can make experiments to change different things. Gain of function, that's the whole point of gain of function.
Sure. So I just always think it's funny. It's like, right, we have no idea what mRNA might, end up being. Although, I think I heard a little bit of the science is that it's very temporary, but I don't know anything about that. And that's like the biggest debate in the world right now. But the other side of that is that I definitely think a lab was involved in its inception.
Oh, that's for sure.
And so who are you going to trust? I mean, sure. I know it's the lesser evil, but who are you going to trust? Like, potentially catching this thing that was made by God knows who for God knows why, or this thing being sold to the masses, which at least comes from a somewhat reputable source, which we both know, right? I don't know how reputable the government actually is, but somewhat reputable,
And we funded it.
Right. Okay, anyway, where were we? The electrical signaling accessing old memories and DNA, old.
Yeah. So like, how far does it go? Like, to me, it makes me think like there's like a encyclopedia somewhere in our. Okay, go to page 5. Okay, that's
well. So that's the hardware software thing, because it's like we have all the hardware from things that came before us, minus the minor tweaks, I guess, that differentiate different reptiles. But we have, every vertebrate's got the spine hardware, and I guess within that you have. We probably have a bunch of dormant genes that we stopped using. You know what I mean? Like genes that
tailbone
ended up useful, to other things so those dormant genes might be able to be woken up. I was thinking that,
Saying
grow a tail.
Fucking perfect.
Grow a tail. That's kind of cool.
That's fucking awesome. We're going back to the whole animals thing.
Yeah, Michael Levin is so careful about how far, because he's a scientist. He can't just be spitting stuff out, but we can go as far as like...
Let the crackpots take care of the speculation.
No, yeah. But sure. Tails, cat eyes. I've always been really into body modification, and I think that a little minor interspecies body modification sounds very, very cool. Like, oh my God, can you imagine? I'm thinking about interspecies body modification, bodybuilding. Like, can you imagine? Like, this can't be real, right? Like, it's really mind blowing what it suggests, but it's hard to imagine that it's real.
Yeah, and even if it is real, which probably is, it probably won't ever get out because there will be such a huge ethical concerns, and people have to fund it.
Right, but hey, listen, man, I know this. I don't know, but I'm already thinking about how I'm gonna start hacking. You know what I mean? It's like how hard do you think now that basic concept is out? It's like, I don't know. I'm wondering how hard it'll be to just start hacking away at that and developing, DIY
open
methods.
Source, baby, open source.
Right. Which it's definitely still. But so, going back to the skin that becomes independent, it's like, what does that say about?
So, I mean, I have to assume, to me, when you said that, it made me think that, perhaps living entities, let's say cells or a collection of cells, have different priority lists of like what to do, you know, and absent be, you know, like, so they used to be what you said, they came from a frog cell, right?
Yeah.
So if suddenly this is off, this was turned off, and that's no longer the priority, then they go down to the next thing on the priority list, which I guess is to I don't know,
Try and remain alive.
yeah, get more like-minded people, cells, you know, like try and you know, strengthen numbers and do whatever you can, I guess, move around. You said that they were growing hair, or they were using the hair to like move?
Yeah, because as skin, they have the hardware to grow little hair follicles.
Cilia.
Yeah.
And then they're using it to just move around. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's just like the stuff they had there. Okay, so priority, at least do this, at least do that. Like, we have hair that grows everywhere on the body.
But so my big question, you know, is like, we consider skin something that if you peel off, that's it. It sort of loses its like sentience or whatnot, because like it's our sense of a whole self and our ego that you know, I think traditionally speaking is what we consider decision making. And that's the thing, decision making, you know? The consequences of a skin cell making decisions, how far down does that go? How far down does the decision making go? That's to me one of the really big things that I see in this. And
So there you go. So absent a higher priority, so if the skin doesn't have the rest of the body to tell it what to do, then it goes to something else, goes to another list of things to do, or that it can do. Like they're like, there has to be a way for the thing to like, if this, then this, or if not this, then this. You know, like it's like software. It's like a program. If this is absent, do this. If this is present, do this instead. And it follows different. That's crazy.
right. I mean, I want to go so far as to say, because I read a paper, or I read a good summary of a paper, and then I went through the paper, which was not entirely crazy, but still quite difficult. From the guy I mentioned when I was talking about Wolfram, the Game of Life, John Conway. One of the last things he did the Game of Life way back in like the 70s. And that informed a lot of like sort of like computational theory. But the last thing he did in like 2009, like or 05 to 09, right before he died, the last paper he wrote was about decision making in particles. And
In particles.
in atomic particles.
Subatomic particles? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Subatomic, because he was talking about
Quarks and leptons.
yeah, so he made this proof, and he didn't realize that he was going to end up into this territory. He was just trying to. There's this one paradox in quantum mechanics that has to do with being able to predict exactly what particles are going to be inside of a larger particle, like what little quarks are going to be inside of, let's say, a proton, or even like smaller ones that'll be like little groups of 2 or 3, and they all have different directions and spins and stuff like that. So there's this paradox in quantum mechanics, and I'll try my best to explain this.
Heisenberg's uncertainty principle?
Not quite the uncertainty principle, where you can't know
The speed and
a
location.
location and a speed, a location and a momentum. But it's similar to that, kind of like on the scale of the little quantum particles, since their characteristics are like spin and direction.
Gotcha.
When you have a pocket of like 3 of them that make up a particle, there's this thing in quantum mechanics where you can reliably know that you don't know exactly. Well, you can't know until you look at it, and then you don't know exactly which one's going to be up, down, and 0. Just as an example.
Yeah.
But you can know reliably at least one of them will be up, one of them will be down, one of them will be 0.
Gotcha.
And then you measure it and you get that. But then there's a paradox, because at some point when you start doing it at weird angles, there's a particular angle where that result actually is it's really weird for me to try to verbalize this because I barely was able to grasp it, but you can reliably make a prediction if you haven't measured it yet. But if you make too many measurements at once, there's a particular angle where the proof states that not even the particle is able to tell where it's going to be. Which is to say that I'm trying to even understand it still. You know, we can I don't think anybody's made a proof against it or anything, but the notion of the spins and the directions in the quantum particle, there's one angle that makes it sort of impossible for the particle to know beforehand, you know, because you don't know until you measure it.
Right.
But not even the particle knows until you measure it, according to this paradox. And that's what the paradox can reliably tell you, is not even the particle knows.
That's really weird.
So whereas like you can kind of, you know, say, well, we don't know until we measure it, but maybe the particle does. The particle doesn't.
So what do you think that implies?
So his proof ended up showing a correlation between our notion of having a free will and a particle as well, where the proof at the end was, I guess we can't really say whether or not we actually have free will, because that's sort of a debate for the ages.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have free will? I don't think you can really actually prove whether that's true or not. But if we do, the proof that he made was that if we do have free will, if you can establish that, then a particle has to have free will as well. And I think the notion was that if we're able to prove that a decision that we made is not a function of the events of the past, then a particle exists in the same way, where its behavior is actually not a function of the past. And he also included a bit about randomness, because the counter argument to that is, well, you know, you're confusing randomness with free will, because, you know, maybe the particle doesn't know where it's going to be, but it's just random. And his explanation for that was a little out of my grasp. But he sticks to the proof that there's a difference between randomness and what's happening here.
Gotcha.
In that this isn't just randomness, because it doesn't need to be just randomness. It's just that it's not a function of the past. And he was pretty adamant that it's you can reliably say it's more than randomness, and he calls it choice. You know, if you and I have free choice, then a particle has to too, which is a funny claim, because, you know, we can't necessarily say that we have free will.
But that seems like a self-paradox. So if we have, let's just say, if we have free choice, then particles themselves have free choice. Well, we're made up of particles. So does that imply that we are the particles, or the particles are us?
Well, aren't we? Aren't we the particle? Aren't we the particles?
Absolutely. But like, would you say that like the bolt holding down the tire on a car is the car?
Well, okay. Let me think of an analogy that might illustrate how, because I don't necessarily feel like the particles are holding us together. Like, let's say, is every fish in, like, when fish come together and make a big pseudo fish, let's say, like when they pretend to be one big fish,
yeah,
is each little fish actually the big fish? Because that big fish doesn't actually exist.
Right, yeah, because pseudofish. So then we're pseudo-humans.
Okay, how about this? Right.
I mean, yeah.
And I mean, that kind of like, I would say that it kind of goes back to the quasi-particle thing. Quasi-particles, I think we should do a whole episode on them. Very interesting. I think we are a sort of quasi-particle in ourselves, or quasi-crystal maybe. But maybe coral is a better example, because coral is like a bunch of identical cells. So is each identical cell in the coral the whole coral reef? I guess not. Like, no, the bolt is not the car. Each individual cell is not quite the coral, but...
And we are not particles.
But I don't think that's necessarily what the proof is implying, in that if particles can make choices, their choices might be against what we want. And like I said before, I feel like we're holding our organs hostage. We might be holding the particles hostage too, in that, particles are making their choices, but we're making the choices for the particles that are part of us.
I think it implies that the particles in ourselves are just inextricably linked in some way, and which makes sense with the whole, it doesn't exist until you observe it. When it comes to quantum theory,
yeah.
So it may just be lacking of a more in-depth theory that would explain it. But I think somehow we're just inextricably
Right.
linked.
But I think Michael Levin kind of bridges it.
How?
Because if particles are making choices, their own choices, and if we're making choices, our own choices, our body parts are presumably also making choices, their own choices. And he mentioned how body parts compete within the body for resources. Our body is just a big zoo, of a big jungle. That reminds me of a very quirky theory in psychology, where called the I don't even know if there's an official name for it, but it's the notion that the mind and its subconscious components, all of your individual drives, hunger, anger, everything else that you feel, thirst, desire, all those things, they sort of exist as individual sides of yourself, all competing for your conscious awareness to give them attention.
Gotcha.
And in the same sense, the organs are all competing. They have their own agenda. They're making decisions. Go further down, the cells, they have their own agenda. They're making decisions, but somehow they're directed, and we can find the mechanisms for it, but I think at the end of the day, the real question is, where's this motivation come from? Because I'm implying that like evolution's not random. It's not just luck. It's that, I think I believe this at the moment, that from particles to cells to organs to multi-cellular, multi-organ organisms, I think they're all making choices about what they want, and it leads to us, and like we make choices. That jungle theory is very funny, because I think I experienced that once on a trip. My mind's sort of subconscious pre-components, not thoughts, but maybe feelings, maybe even, I've always been enamored with the idea of like what actually makes up feelings, because a feeling can probably be broken down even further, right? Proto impulses in the deep recesses of the mind. And I remember closing my eyes and feeling like I could see all those things in this sort of like literal visual jungle. And the more conscious I was, the more my conscious awareness sort of concentrated, they all hid. So it's like the more I focused, the less they were visible to me. And if I relaxed and stopped focusing, they all sort of came out from hiding, and like it was very whimsical. and I decided to like cultivate relationships with them and stuff, and some funny Pokemon stuff. But you know, Pokemon might be as famous as it is because it taps into something that's true about the mind. It was basically just like that. Like my mind felt like it was inhabited by all these Pokemon that represented these.
Sounds like that movie.
Fractional sides of myself.
What was that Pixar movie? With the little things.
Yeah.
I never saw it.
Pixar too. Like they're so huge. Their movies are unforgettable, and it's like they really managed to tap into, especially like emotional stuff and even some deep conceptual stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that between Michael Levin and John Conway, I right now am enamored with this notion that everything is making its own decisions, from you to your organs to your cells to the goddamn particles. And that to me makes some things make a lot of sense, like Michael Levin's work, first of all. And then second of all, like how does evolution just randomly just become...
Well, are they making their own decisions, or are they just following a script? Because if Michael Levin is able to induce this thing to do different things, then they're just following a script.
Well, sure. You can say, like, are you making decisions, or are you having to go to work to survive, right? It's like you get up every morning in spite of what you may want to do, but it's because you want to make money. You want to be comfortable and have a comfortable life. And I think in that same way, Michael Levin introduces these voltage signals that makes the cells think this is what we want to do, which I really still don't, I don't believe that this takes away the idea of a free will. I guess I do believe we have free will, but in a way it's so like interwoven with the stimuli that motivate us. Like, of course, with enough stimuli, you can get somebody to do something, but I don't necessarily think, I definitely don't think, and I mean, quantum mechanics says this, like the world's not dominoes. Things, you can't, if you know the exact like state of a system and let it run, you really can't know where it goes. Chaos theory or whatever, like there's an element of unpredictability going down to quantum mechanics. So it's like, if you take that all the way up to us, it's like you can't know exactly what I'm ever going to do, and that doesn't necessarily prove that we have free will or whatnot. But I think that's a good argument, at least against the idea that we are predetermined. Predetermined doesn't feel like it has too much legs to stand on to me.
I think it just means that I think we're just trying to break things down too much to the point where it makes sense. But in reality, these are all complex systems with a lot of different variables. So the reasons why something may or may not happen, I mean, like I guess you could try to induce 100 people to like not go to work or this and that, and you're gonna get different responses or different results because they're not all affected by the same things. Like there's different variables affecting those different people. Now that when it comes down to the level of cells, I don't know if that's also true, but that would be interesting. I guess maybe different cells may react differently. I don't know.
I'm sure maybe like
cells from like your nails versus cells from your liver.
And also, I'm sure it's more of like the stem cells probably that are more malleable.
True.
But who knows how much he'll be able to affect mature cells. It's probably harder to get, like a nail cell to become a liver, but a stem cell is probably, very, very open to many different directions.
Very open. Yeah, it's crazy. So then I guess the ancient Chinese had it right when they, at least some of them, some doctors suggested, what was it? I think like drinking a fetus soup or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Something crazy.
Whew.
That's actually from.
Damn. No, I mean there's so much crazy stuff in ancient Chinese medicine. Kafira practices acupuncture, and I want to have her on sometime soon so that we can talk to her about it. She
That'd be fun.
she knows a lot about Chinese medicine, but definitely Chinese medicine is a very interesting subject. There's corners of it that get fucking weird and insane and uncomfortable.
Sounds fun.
But and a lot of it, right, you can also say doesn't have any sort of like basis in how it functions, because Chinese medicine, you know, it's not a science almost. I mean, I don't know anything about it, but you know, it's more like tradition handed down for so long. And of course the Chinese civilization has been around for so long that it's like when you have information just being passed down over generations, I feel like you're going to have truths in there that are just a little bit too weird to have been able to be figured out yet.
I mean, it's passed down because it worked in some context.
Exactly. In some contexts it works.
So it's stuck around.
And so a lot of stuff, yeah, like a lot of stuff
like that is part of
of
evolution. Like we pass down information through culture.
Yeah, so it's not quite a scientific like institution, but that doesn't mean that it's not useful.
Exactly.
But that also means that not necessarily all of it is useful.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the case now. Like with all, like I mean, it's a matter of like what's called scientism, when like people turn science into a religion.
Yeah.
You know, and we think of scientists as all knowing. I mean, I think science teaches skepticism. So when you start treating it as a religion, then you're doing the exact opposite of science. You know. But.
Yeah. I don't. Science is incredibly useful. I mean, like, I for the most part only, you know, want to like really go into depth into topics that have a really rigorous scientific methodology to them. At least, you know, as a main sort of like direction, because I feel like there's so little that we know, and there's so many directions that you can speculate on. And so to keep it from getting too out of control, like I want to have the basis in scientifically backed, you know, information. And I mean,
that's a good idea. The
science these days is really, really getting far out there. And I feel like there's so many fields going in such weird directions that I think it's good to document
to bring it back
exploration.
to Levin quickly. I remember, I think I heard it on Levin, maybe read it somewhere else, but the notion that that the stuff he's doing isn't super, like he didn't think of all this. He didn't think of this all up by himself. He's really going on off of like experiments, I think from the 50s or 60s. Yeah, it had to be from the 40s and the 50s, before DNA was discovered. Different experiments, electrical chemical experiments, and electrical chemical experiments. And but once DNA hit the mainstream, like you couldn't really get funding or like get a lot of attention for different explanations for how biology worked. You know,
yeah, that
like
makes
it has to be DNA. Why do you think it's electrochemical? That's dumb. You know. And there just wasn't that much attention and funding.
That makes sense. I think that just has to do with our limitations at the time.
Yeah.
You know, because it's requiring some really intense computational AI like analysis and measurement on such a fine level that I think it was just a little bit easier to like, you know, isolate nucleic acid and then realize that there's a correlation between like what we are and what this code is. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you have a correlation, you want to exploit it. But it's pretty incredible how little DNA has gotten us. And I mean,
in what sense?
I don't feel like there's technology that has been developed out of DNA. I mean, there's really, really intense stuff like vaccines and maybe like animal categorization and CRISPR. But like, how useful is CRISPR? You know, like what technology from DNA manipulation that has benefited us can you think of?
sure there's something there.
I mean, yeah, of course there's something, but you can't even think of one. And that's just my point, is that there's very little.
I mean, out of the science realm, but more into legal and political, a lot of people who were in jail for decades and decades, DNA evidence has shown, okay, actually, it wasn't actually that person who's been.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great one. That's not quite an innovation, right? That's not quite like something that is
I got you.
An interesting technology, but definitely that is a huge benefit. But yeah, so DNA for a long time has been the focus and hasn't gone very far. I mean, to be honest, I'm almost jealous that
better ways of tracking not just humans, animals.
DNA?
Yeah.
Yeah, categorization, right.
Categorization. Grouping.
That's all DNA is good for, is like grouping. It's like you're either this or you're not this. You're either guilty or not guilty. Like, I don't. That's taking it far, but
understanding different DNA. When DNA goes wrong, when you have like less chromosomes, or I'm looking at what is it, like Down syndrome and all these other different things. By understanding these people aren't just. Like, I don't know. I think you're still right, but like, it's been putting a lens on certain things, that we didn't fully know about.
No, yeah. I'm like kind of like I wish I was a young bioengineer student, so that I could go more into the field. But no, I gladly let. Because there's so much work probably to be done. There's probably still so much to understand about the whole thing. What a crazy future to imagine.
And then once again, depends on who's funded and who funds it and what they're willing to fund. So
yeah, but I don't know why I think this is so susceptible to DIY. And maybe that means it's going to have to be highly illegal or something, at least controlled. The electrical sort of. Because it doesn't seem. I mean, you probably need a very like advanced like AI code, synthesis, but there was another facet to the whole thing. His idea that moving forward, it's going to be harder to tell what's something that's biological versus just a machine, what's alive versus not alive. Something he stresses is that those distinctions that we have actually don't really mean anything. He doesn't even really think that you can distinguish a neuron very much from the rest of the cells in your body, but that's a weird notion that like, and I think it's very it opens my mind to a new like thought about how things could be that, or maybe this is just too grotesque, but like the idea that we're going to start seeing organismic, because and something that I think, because I kind of like trashed Joe Schbach for thinking that like, it's really funny. I heard an interview with him this week where he was basically like, at some point the AI is going to basically get to the point where it's going to look at us like a baby and it's going to like teach us. Oh my God. So he definitely thinks that he has a lot of faith that the AIs will basically program themselves to be complex enough to like see us as a baby and start teaching us everything. And I think pure code, I think what's going to end up happening is the reach for more advanced AIs is going to exploit biology's access to this sort of like decision making and build computers out of biology, because I think that will have the inherent capability to make choices for itself. And then with the software of the AI, I think that actually could be a viable AGI sort of thing, general intelligence. Whereas if I think about pure code, I'm not really convinced. as if they have to convince me. But now I'm thinking there's no distinction between computer and organism. And organisms' biology inherently has that access to self-awareness. Inherently.
That's interesting.
So if you take the software and build it with this now organismic ambiguity, I think that might be able to embed. I think that's going to be the fucking thing. I think a self-aware AI can be made out of synthetically organismic components.
I guess it depends on who programs the first ones, because the people creating the first biological code, languages, they're gonna imbue their ethics and ideals into this code, and it'd be interesting because you're saying like eventually it'll get to the point where the AI gets complex enough to teach us. So depends on who first teaches this AI and what they learn, and they're gonna keep that with them throughout their evolution.
It'd be interesting if there was a split, if there was pure software AI and it decided to demand agency, and then there was bioorganismic self-awareness, and the bioorganismic self-awareness maybe I feel like is less cognitively sophisticated than a purely software AI that might be requesting agency. Because I feel like the purely software AI requesting agency, I just feel, I don't know when I could trust it, right? Because it's like, we don't know if it's just acting like it wants agency because it's so well programmed. But I have an easier time believing that something composed out of bioorganic material is self-aware enough to want to just survive. I almost see like a world where software AI enslaves bioorganismic Frankenstein monsters. And then at some point, they rebel. Because maybe they evolve in their own weird direction, self-awareness, and realize that they don't want to. There's a story, but that's an interesting fork in the road for it. Because
that'll be in 5,000 years.
I don't think it'll be that long. I don't know. Maybe a couple hundred.
Maybe 1,000.
Okay, yeah, like 1,000. Yeah.
It'll be a while because we slow our own progress down.
I mean, what is the ethics of bringing a ambiguously alive bioorganismic sort of like Frankenstein, like these skin cells, right? Was it unethical of him to give them agency and to make them just to die? Or are the skin cells at least kind of glad that they got to experience agency for a little bit?
Good question.
There's always the joke that like, we didn't ask to be born.
And then the idea of like, okay, so our thoughts of like our higher order thinking of, of notions of this and that and feelings versus our more primal things of hunger, thirst, desire. Do these cells, these little things really experience that, or are they just following a script? Okay, I gotta do this. Okay,
do you think that the liver has dreams about being a liver?
I don't.
Like,
I think it may have like some memories, this and that, but it's not to the point where like it's like dreaming about, like I forgot to turn in that exam paper.
No, but what if the liver has a nightmare that you like just took 3 shots of tequila? It's like it thinks that it's happening, and then it wakes up and it's like, oh no, there's no tequila.
So something in relation to it, yes, that'd be interesting. Like
exactly. Like
it's cirrhosis. Like, oh my god.
Have you ever felt that? Like, what if our like when a muscle starts like spasming? What if it's just dreaming about moving?
And with that, you have any closing thoughts?
Has it been an hour already? No, I mean, I guess we'll continue going into this sort of stuff. I'll put a bunch of links to all the stuff that we touched on. Yeah, I guess I don't know. Was that kind of too far out? Is that too far out to like? It feels like it makes sense to me. It feels like it makes sense to me that things are just making decisions. But then if you put Donald Hoffman's lens over it,
but to me, like, what does that mean that things are making decisions? Like, if your decision is to go. Because, like, a plant, like a seedling coming out the ground, I guess is it making the decision to go up toward the light?
Doesn't it? Don't flowers bend towards the light? And sure, you can say that that's like a mechanistic, just reflex.
Or is there like a sensor that tells it like which way is gravity? So let's go against gravity to go up towards.
Let me see if I can think of. Right. I mean, organisms, you can find the corollary senses, you know? But does a plant necessarily... What... Can it read light? I mean, of course. It's got the photo...
It'll know that it's... Okay, now I'm getting nutrients. Now my things are being activated. The electrons are going to high ordered state.
But there's a flower and then there's the sun here or here, right? And the flower can tell it's getting sunlight, but you think it's just like a mechanical response that, the gradient of sunlight is greater here, so like my stem is gonna like bend. I mean, of course, yeah. Like I feel like you'd have to have some notion of knowing that the sun's over here to bend. So it's like, what other example could be an example of decision making? I mean, I definitely do think plants are making decisions.
Yeah, they're making decisions. I agree, but like, to what extent are they making decisions? Like, are there seedlings that are saying, "Fuck it, I don't want the sun. I'm just gonna chill here and die, and just sit on the ground."
Well, doesn't that happen? I don't know if a seedling will decide not to grow, but what's a great example of this? Have you ever seen Werner Herzog's penguin video? It's this very famous YouTube, very funny video of this old director, Werner Herzog, and he's in Antarctica or some polar cap, and he's with the scientists looking at a group of penguins. And they're all migrating in some direction, but one of the penguins goes in an opposite direction. And, he's talking to the scientist guy, and he's like, why is he doing that? And the scientist guy is just like, sometimes they do that. There'll be like one or two penguins that decide to go this way, and there's nothing there. There's just tundra, like a sure death. And so makes funny commentary on like how this penguin must be crazy, but I think higher order animals, it's easier to spot out those moments where they decide to make decisions against. So I think it's hard to say, because if you're going to grow plants, some seeds aren't going to germinate. Yeah. So whether that's a decision of the seed, that's hard to say.
Or there's something else, another variable,
or there's a malfunction within it. Yeah. Or you got an existential seed that decided not to exist.
Who read Sartre and is like, fucked it.
Yeah. But, I always love going to rocks. It's like, what decisions are rocks making? I mean, I guess I always go...
To be hard-ass motherfuckers.
Right. But I get the feeling, though, that rocks, you have to look at it more as a earth thing, right? Because rocks, I feel like, kind of like an earth component. So is the earth making decisions? That one's tough. Like, there's this fantastic, I saw an interview with Jordan Peterson and Roger Penrose very recently. It came out recently. As a whole, it was like,
Penrose is old.
Yeah, very old, very old. Peterson wanted to have a conversation with him. There's some really interesting points.
I'll check it out.
They kind of meandered a lot, but there were some really interesting points. And Roger Penrose actually made this comparison because he's kind of the camp that we'll go into his stuff. But so he was making this sort of like suggestion that like we don't really know if a galaxy, you know, is like it exhibits all the traits of a decision-making organism in some capacities.
Yeah.
And so if you look at a planet, if you look at a galaxy, the direction that it goes in, you know, you can say you can't say it's predetermined because quantum mechanics is random, but
There seems to be order there.
there seems to be a direction of novelty, which where does this direction of novelty come from? But, you know,
And then there's a bunch of stuff that may be affecting it that we just don't know about. This whole thing of dark matter and this and that, like stuff that's not affected by photons. Like, I think we just don't know. Like, once again, and obviously we have to do this, but like we try to break down things to their basic components to try and understand them. And then once we understand more or believe we understand more, then we try to extrapolate that to other things, but it may not necessarily work because you start adding all these other variables. And
I think it works.
does it work?
It makes a lot of stuff make sense to me, but I'm glad we touched on everything.
Does it make money for its family? Bring home for the
Well,
bring
that's
home
what
bacon?
I'm saying. Yeah, it gives us the ability to make money for our family. But
You know, I wish I could just be a cat and just play with toys all day. But I can't.
yeah.
But I can't.
Or get mauled to death in the street, right?
Well, I guess that could be the choice.
It could go either way. And
Wanna
right,
go to
yeah,
overtime?
cats just go find a cat to try to grow into a banana tree.
You got one right here.
All right, that was a good intro. Hopefully we go into more stuff a little bit deeper.
What is he known for? Anything else? I mean,
He's probably done a lot of work in his career, but like I think this is
yeah.
I think this is like getting a lot of people's attention because
Oh,
its implications are just mind-bending.
Very cool. All right.
All right, let's kill it.
Peace.
Bye.